Hello, my name is Joshua Anderson. I run TriBridges Chess Club, and today I'm going to speak about a game Faul versus Gundersen from the 1928 Pietzcker Tournament. Here is a slide with some background about the event. Much like when I ask questions, we'll have a brief pause, but mostly we'll expect you or allow you to pause if you want to read more or take more time to answer the question. So if you want to read more about this, just pause your computer screen and there you go. Now, as I mentioned, the game was played in 1928 in the Pietzcker Tournament. This is not a particularly well-known event. These were done from 1925 to 1940. In this particular case, we see Gunnar Gundersen, who was a top player in the Oceania area of Australia and New Zealand, playing a gentleman named A.H. Faul. Start off with e4. There we go. And from e4, Faul chooses the French defense and plays e6. White plays the standard opening choice here of d4, right? We want to get our pieces out, and d4 allows us to bring out our bishop, bring out the other bishop. We, we can bring out either bishop, we can bring out our knights very easily, and so d4 is a popular choice. Black then played d5, again, the typical response in this position, and white played the advanced variation. Not surprisingly, this means we advance the pawn. So the pawn goes to e5. You see here a small pawn chain. A pawn chain is when pawns are protecting each other diagonally. And black chose to attack the base of the pawn chain, right? Because since the pawns protect each other, you want to attack the base pawn, which is the pawn that's not protected by any other pawns. So black played c5 and attacks the pawn on d4. White played c3. Now we have a much longer pawn chain, right? 4 squares. In this case, black decides to play pawn takes pawn, taking the pawn on d4. White takes back. And we still have no pieces developed after 5 moves, but black now plays bishop b4, developing his bishop and checking the king. White has many ways he can block here. Some of them are, of course, ridiculously bad, like queen d2, allowing for bishop takes queen. This cannot possibly be recommended. Knight c3 and knight d2 are common choices as well. Here they choose knight c3. After knight c3, black can take and trade off, but doesn't in this case. He plays knight c6, providing an attack on the d4 pawn. White develops with knight f3, and black plays knight ge7. Typically, this knight would go to f6, but of course the pawn would take, so the knight's forced to either go to e7 or to h6. But if we went to h6, then white might try, especially after black castles, white might try a bishop takes knight and opening up the black king. So here black simply played knight g to e7. And white develops his bishop so he can get himself ready to castle. He plays bishop d3. Here, black probably can play knight g6 or knight f5. This will stop the bishop from attacking this h7 pawn. This is extremely important, as we'll see in just a moment. Instead, black doesn't provide that prophylactic move, meaning a move that helps with prevention of an opponent's attack. And instead, he just goes ahead and castles. When he castles, this opens us up for something called the Greek gift, or the classic bishop sacrifice. There's a great book on this by John Edwards, a world correspondence champion, who wrote a book called Sacking the Citadel, which explores this sacrifice in great detail. And in this case, white immediately plays bishop takes h7. This will force the king to come out. King h8 doesn't particularly work, so king takes bishop. And we want to figure out how to best attack this king. Certainly ideas like queen to c2, queen to d3 are natural looking moves, but it's not clear exactly how we might proceed after, say, queen to d3, knight to g6. Probably white's still winning here pretty easily after h4, but it's much more complicated than the knight g5 move that gets played in the game. So white plays knight g5. If black plays a move like king h8, white's just going to finish him off after queen h5, king here, and the queen will go where to checkmate? Yes, h7. All right. So that was not going to work. So we have a couple other choices. King h6. But after king h6, white has a winning move here that will win him a queen. Again, you can pause your video if you like to see for a minute. We're going to play knight takes f7 or knight takes e6. In both cases, the queen will be under attack. The king will have to move, and the knight will take the queen. Black will take back, but he's lost a queen for a knight. His king is exposed, and bad things will happen shortly thereafter, I'm sure. All right, so if we go back to the game, we saw knight g5, and the king went to g6. So after king to g6, black certainly is losing, but it's not exactly clear how white will checkmate, but he's certainly developing his pieces easily now. So white played h4. He'd like to get pieces into the attack. Certainly the queen to g4 is an idea, but h4 is going to allow the rook to get involved as well. Black played knight takes d4. This game has been examined for almost 100 years now, and no one's quite sure why knight takes d4 was played. It certainly isn't a good move. Technically, the computers find that queen takes knight is the best choice, but queen to g4, which is what's played in the game, is also winning easily. Queen to g4 does allow black to play knight to c2 check, but this is not a big deal. White can easily get out of check. If the knight takes the rook in the corner, hardly helps save the king. The black king will still be checkmated in just a move or two. So instead of playing the knight down to c7 or c2, he went ahead and played pawn to f5, attacking the queen. The idea here is now this discovered check fails because pawn will take queen. So white will take the queen, but white's going to lose his knight. Meanwhile, black does not lose the piece that takes the queen, the pawn. So after f5, white needs a second move or a separate move and chooses instead to play pawn to h5 check. This is going to force the king to h6. Once the king goes to h6, it's simply a question of our best way to finish off the king. Now, white has a host of good moves here. Obviously, any knight move will be a check from the bishop. There's two ways out of the discovered check. I can either play king to h7 or I can play pawn to g5. Had he played king to h7, undoubtedly nobody would remember this game. White has a simple, straightforward checkmate here by doing what? Yes, that's correct. By playing queen takes pawn on g7, and the king has nowhere to go. And this is a checkmate. These are often called queen and helper mates. In this case, the queen's being helped by the knight, and the king is stuck on the edge of the board. Instead, black played the move hg5, hoping that g5 would allow him to escape. White has a very simple checkmate. Queen takes pawn, king to h7, and again we come up with the queen and helper mate. But white has a much cooler and much more memorable move here. If you were white, what would you play? Yes, correct. You would play pawn takes pawn on Passant rule, and now we have checkmate. The rook covers the squares h7, h6, and h5. The queen protects the pawn on g6, and the knight covers the square on g7. The queen, the knight, and the bishop all cover the square on g5. Thank you very much, and I hope you've enjoyed the game.